They shackled him with enough force to crush a starship. They tortured him until his blood painted the walls. And through it all, the human just smiled. He knew something they didn't. Part 1. The Silent Prisoner. The Kazari prison ship Void's Embrace had held 10,000 species across 1,200 cycles. Its crystalline walls had witnessed the breaking of warlords, the shattering of empires, and the complete mental collapse of beings who once commanded star fleets. Commander Vexale had overseen them all, and in all his centuries of service, he had never once felt uncertain. Until they brought in the human. The creature hung suspended in gravitational shackles, arms spread wide, head bowed. Moisture dripped from its exposed flesh, what the briefing files called sweat, and its breathing came in measured intervals that Vexale's neural implants flagged as deliberately controlled, not panicked, not defeated. Patient. Designation, Marcus Cole, the intake officer droned, her segmented fingers dancing across the holographic manifest. Species, human. Origin, Sol system, third planet. Captured during the Helix Nebula incident. Charges, destruction of 17 Kazari warships. Assassination of High Admiral Thelvos. Unauthorized survival. Vexale's 4 eyes narrowed. Unauthorized survival. The human vessel was destroyed with all hands aboard, confirmed by 3 separate sensor arrays. Yet this one was found floating in the debris field, alive. Our scientists believe he survived vacuum exposure for approximately 47 standard minutes. Impossible. The word surfaced in Vexale's mind before he could suppress it. No species could survive that long without environmental protection. The briefing files had mentioned something about humans, something that made the Galactic Council nervous, but surely they had exaggerated. Has he spoken? Vexale asked. Not a word, not since capture. We've attempted neural interrogation, chemical loosening, even empathic bonding with a Tellurian mindweaver. Nothing, he simply looks at us. Vexale approached the prisoner, his clawed feet clicking against the obsidian floor. The human's head rose slowly, and for the first time the commander saw those strange, forward-facing eyes, predator's eyes, the kind that focused, tracked, and calculated trajectory. They were utterly calm. I am Commander Vexale, he announced, his translator converting the words into the guttural sounds of human speech. You will tell me how you destroyed the 7th Fleet. You will tell me how you survived. And you will tell me the location of your homeworld's military installations. The human's lips curved, not a smile, something else, something the briefing files had warned about. Defiance. Your silence will not protect you here, Vexale continued. The Kazari have broken minds far greater than yours. We have shattered the will of beings who commanded psionic armies. You are merely a primitive from a primitive species. Your resistance is expected but futile. The human's head tilted, a fraction of movement, and in that moment Vexale saw something shift in those predator eyes, not fear, not submission. Amusement. The prisoner's gaze moved, scanning the chamber. The guards, the weapons, the structural supports, the ventilation systems, every detail catalogued in seconds, filed away behind that wall of silence. Vexale stepped back without realizing it. Increase the neural dampeners, he ordered, and the gravitational restraints. I want him unable to twitch without pain. Commander, the intake officer said hesitantly, the restraints are already at maximum. Any higher and we risk. Do it. The energy fields intensified. Blue lightning crackled along the human's limbs, and Vexale waited for the scream. The plea, the breaking point that always came. The human's muscles tensed. Every cord and sinew stood out beneath skin that glistened with exertion. His jaw clenched tight enough to shatter weaker bones, but his eyes never closed, never wavered. And still he did not speak. When the torture cycle ended, the human remained conscious. Barely. Blood trickled from his nose, a biological response to extreme cranial pressure, the medical officer noted, but those predator eyes still tracked every movement in the room. "Fascinating," the medical officer whispered. "His neural pathways are adapting. The pain signals are being rerouted, compartmentalized. I've never seen a carbon-based life form do this in real time." "What does that mean?" "It means he's not ignoring the pain, Commander. He's accepting it, metabolizing it." The medical officer's tendrils curled with unease. "There's an old Kazari legend about warriors who could consume agony itself. We always assumed it was mythology." Vexel stared at the human, Marcus Cole. This creature from a backwater system that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel a century ago. This member of a species so young they barely registered on the galactic timeline. "Prepare a cell in Sector 7, Vexel ordered. "The deep levels, no contact with other prisoners, no communication devices within 50 meters, and triple the guard rotation." "Commander, Sector 7 is reserved for." "I know what it's reserved for." Vexel turned away from those watching eyes. "This human goes there, tonight." As the guards moved to transport the prisoner, Vexel allowed himself one final look. The human hung limply in his restraints now, conserving energy. But in the moment before the chamber doors closed, Marcus Cole's head rose one last time. He looked directly at Vexel. And he winked. Part 2. The VOICES in the dark. Sector 7 had another name among the prisoners, the Throat of Silence. It was the deepest level of the Void's embrace, carved from the ship's original hull before the Kazari enhanced it with stolen technology. The walls here didn't just contain prisoners, they consumed them. Psychic dampening fields layered atop sound-nullifying membranes, creating a void so complete that most beings went insane within 3 cycles. Marcus Cole had been there for 17. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor, eyes closed, breathing steady. The darkness was absolute, even his adjusted human vision could perceive nothing. The silence was deeper still. No heartbeat from nearby cells, no footsteps of guards, no distant hum of the ship's engines. Just him and the void. In the emptiness, memories surfaced like bubbles from a deep sea. "The galaxy isn't ready for us," Admiral Chen had said during the final briefing. "Not because we're weak, Marcus, because we're not. Every species out there evolved in some kind of competition, for resources, for territory, for survival. But none of them competed the way we did. None of them have our history. Our history. 12,000 years of continuous warfare, son. We've fought ourselves across every terrain this universe has to offer. Jungle, desert, tundra, mountains, oceans, cities. We've weaponized everything from fire to atoms. And the thing that scares them most, we're still here. We didn't burn ourselves out. We got better at it." Marcus opened his eyes to darkness. 17 cycles. In that time he had mapped every sound in the facility, or rather, the absence of sounds. The feeding slot that opened exactly every 12 hours, marked by a faint whisper of displaced air. The guard rotation that passed his cell perimeter every 4 hours, detectable only by the microscopic vibration of the floor. The distant rhythm of the ship's power core, so low it was felt rather than heard. He knew this prison now, every breath it took, every heartbeat of its systems. And he had found its weaknesses. The feeding slot whispered open. A tray slid through, containing the usual nutrient paste the Kazari considered sufficient for human metabolism. Marcus didn't move toward it immediately. He waited, counted. 3 seconds for the slot to seal, 2 seconds for the magnetic lock to engage. Then he stood. His movement in the darkness was precise, economical. Each step exactly measured, having mapped the cell's dimensions by touch during his first cycle. He reached the tray and lifted it, running his fingers along its edges. Crystalline composite, harder than steel, edges rounded to prevent weaponization. The Kazari thought of everything. Almost. Marcus pressed his thumb against a specific point on the tray's underside, a seam where two sections of crystal joined, invisible to the eye, invisible to standard scanning equipment. But to human touch, honed by 17 cycles of darkness, it stood out like a beacon. He didn't break the tray, that would trigger alarms. Instead, he applied pressure, patient, sustained pressure, the kind that would take 10 more cycles to yield results. The kind no Kazari would believe possible. They didn't understand patience the way humans did. Their species had evolved without competition. Their world had been a paradise of resources and harmony. When they developed space travel, they had conquered not through warfare but through technological superiority. They had never needed to wait, to plan, to suffer in silence while preparing for a single, perfect moment. They had never been hunted. Marcus ate the nutrient paste, tasteless, barely adequate. He calculated he'd lost approximately 15 pounds since capture, an acceptable sacrifice for what was coming. He returned to his position in the center of the cell, cross-legged, eyes closed. And he began to plan. Not the escape that had been determined within the first 3 cycles, every contingency mapped, every obstacle cataloged, every guard position memorized through sound and vibration. No, Marcus was planning what came after. The Kazari had taken something from humanity during the Helix Nebula incident, something important, something that Admiral Chen had given her life to protect. The data core contained in his neural implant, hidden so deep that even the Tellurian mind weavers couldn't find it, held the location. The Kazari didn't know he had it. They thought he was just a soldier, a weapon, a primitive curiosity to be studied and eventually discarded. They had no idea he was the message. In the darkness, Marcus smiled. Soon. Part 3. The cracks begin. Warden Telvos received the first report during morning meditation. Unusual activity in Sector 7, sir. Telvos opened his secondary eyes, keeping his primary pair focused on the mandala floating before him. Define unusual. The human, sir, prisoner 771, he's been interacting with his food tray. Interacting. Touching it, pressing on specific points. Our surveillance AI flagged it as potential escape behavior, but our analysts can't determine what he's trying to accomplish. The tray shows no signs of damage or alteration. Telvos finally looked away from his meditation. Show me. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the interior of the human cell. Infrared imaging, the only way to see in Sector 7's absolute darkness, revealed a hunched form, methodically running its fingers along the edges of a feeding tray. He's been doing this for 16 hours. Same motions, same pressure points. Our materials experts say even with 1,000 cycles, he couldn't compromise the crystalline structure by hand. Telvos watched the image for a long moment. The human's movements were hypnotic in their consistency. Press, hold, release. Move, press, hold, release. What is he doing? We don't know, sir. That's why we flagged it. Telvos had been warden of the Void's embrace for 200 cycles. He had overseen the incarceration of mass murderers, planet killers, and beings whose crimes defied translation. He knew prisoners. He understood them. This one made no sense. Increase surveillance. I want his cell monitored by 3 separate AI systems. Any deviation from baseline behavior, report directly to me. Yes, sir, there's one other thing. What? Prisoner 771's biological readings. His heart rate has been perfectly steady since arrival, exactly 60 beats per minute human measurement. It hasn't varied by a single beat, not during the initial torture, not during isolation, not even during sleep. Telvos felt something cold settle in his thorax. That's not possible. Biological systems fluctuate. It's a fundamental principle of carbon-based life. We thought the sensors were malfunctioning. We replaced them twice. The readings are accurate, sir. What does that mean? The officer hesitated. Our xenobiologists theorize that the human is exercising deliberate control over his autonomic functions. Essentially, he's manually operating systems that should be involuntary. To what end? We don't know, but one theory suggests he's conserving resources, like an organism entering a deliberate hibernation state while remaining fully conscious, preparing for something that requires maximum energy expenditure. Telvos turned back to the holographic display. The human continued his methodical movements. Press, hold, release, move. I want a full security audit of Sector 7. Every system, every weakness, every theoretical vulnerability. Sir, Sector 7 has never experienced a security breach in. I don't care what it's never experienced. I care about what might happen next. This prisoner concerns me in ways I cannot articulate. Do the audit. As the officer departed, Telvos remained staring at the image. The human's face was turned slightly upward now, as if he could feel the surveillance watching him, as if he knew. And for the first time in 200 cycles, Warden Telvos felt something he barely recognized. Doubt. Part 4. Whispers of the Hunted. The prisoners of the Void's embrace existed in a delicate ecosystem. 7,000 beings from 300 worlds, each with their own hierarchies, alliances, and enmities. Information was currency, secrets were weapons, and rumors spread faster than light. The rumor about Sector 7 began on Cycle 18. Threnax the Devourer, a massive reptilian warlord who had conquered 11 systems before his capture, first heard it from a Melurian smuggler in the exercise yard. They have something down there, in the deep levels, something that frightens the guards. Threnax snorted, his scales rippling with amusement. Nothing frightens the Kazari, they're too arrogant to know fear. I saw Commander Vexale after the intake. He was pale, shaking. He ordered Sector 7 locked down for 17 cycles. For what crime, what species? Human. Threnax paused. The word carried weight across the galaxy now, ever since the Helix Nebula incident. The single human vessel that had destroyed an entire fleet before being vaporized. The impossible survival story. The whispers of a species that refused to follow galactic conventions. One human. They deployed Sector 7 for one human. Not just any human, the one from Helix, the sole survivor. Threnax had commanded armies that spanned star systems. He had faced down the Kazari military at its peak and lived to surrender on his own terms. He understood threat assessment in ways few beings could. And the information he was receiving made no tactical sense. Why would they put a single soldier in the throat of silence? It's designed for beings with psionic abilities. Humans are baseline organics, fragile, weak. That's what I asked. The Melurian leaned closer, his voice dropping. But here's the thing. The guard rotations in Sector 7 have tripled. They've installed 3 additional surveillance systems. And yesterday, Warden Telvos canceled his meditation schedule for the first time in 200 cycles. To do what? To personally monitor the human cell for 8 hours straight. Threnax felt the rumble building in his chest, not anger, but something else, something that had kept him alive through countless battles and betrayals. Instinct. I want to know everything about this human. Every scrap of information that enters this facility. Can you arrange that? For a price. Name it. When you escape, and we both know you're planning something, you take me with you. Threnax considered the smuggler, small, weak, but useful, the kind of tool that could be discarded when its purpose was served. Agreed, now tell me about the human. There's not much to tell. He doesn't speak, doesn't react, doesn't seem to eat much of what they give him. But here's what nobody can explain. He's not deteriorating. 17 cycles in complete sensory deprivation should have driven any baseline organic insane. Most beings start screaming after 3 days. He hasn't made a sound. Perhaps he's already mad. Perhaps, the Malurian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Perhaps humans are something we don't understand yet, something the galaxy hasn't encountered before. Every species can be understood. Every species has weaknesses. That's what the Kazari thought, before Helix, before a single human ship killed Admiral Thelvos and 17 warships. The smuggler paused. You want to know what the really scary part is? Tell me. According to our sources, the Kazari scanned that human vessel before the battle. Standard reconnaissance. They cataloged its weapons systems, its hull composition, its crew complement. Do you know what their assessment was? What? Minimal threat, primitive technology, recommend capture for study. The Malurian's eyes were wide with something approaching awe, and then it killed everything in the sector, in 37 minutes. Threnax stared across the exercise yard. Somewhere beneath them, in the deepest level of the prison, a creature sat in absolute darkness, waiting, planning. Get me that information, he said, whatever the cost. Because Threnax the Devourer had not survived this long by ignoring warnings. And everything about this situation screamed danger. Part 5. The Breaking Point. Cycle 23. The crystalline tray in Marcus's cell finally showed its first microfracture. He felt it before he saw it, a slight give beneath his thumb where there had been resistance. 6 cycles of sustained pressure, applied to the exact same point, had accomplished what Kazari materials science said was impossible. But then again, Kazari materials science had never accounted for human stubbornness. Marcus withdrew his thumb and breathed. For the first time in 23 cycles, he allowed his heart rate to increase, 62 beats per minute, then 65. His body responded to the chemical release like a starving man responding to food. Soon, he returned to his central position and resumed his meditation. But now his mind moved differently, shifting from planning to execution. Phase 1 was complete. The tray would be collected during the next feeding cycle, replaced with an identical one. The microfracture would go undetected. He had made sure of that, placing it precisely where the collection mechanisms would apply pressure and mask the damage. Phase 2 required patience of a different kind. Marcus closed his eyes and began to count. Not seconds, not minutes, but the vibrations in the floor that marked the guard rotations. He needed exactly 17 more to complete his mapping of their patrol patterns. 17 rotations to find the gap he knew existed. Every system had gaps. Every perfect design had a flaw born of the assumption of perfection. The Kazari thought their prison was unbreakable because no one had ever escaped. They didn't understand that absence of escape didn't mean absence of vulnerability. It simply meant no one had been patient enough or capable enough to find it. On rotation 15, Marcus detected an anomaly. A slight hesitation in the vibration pattern, a guard pausing where guards never paused, uncertainty in a system that was supposed to be absolute. Someone was asking questions. Marcus filed this information away. The Kazari were becoming suspicious. Good. Suspicion bred caution, and caution bred changes in routine. Changes in routine created windows. On rotation 17, the window appeared. A 2.7-second gap between patrol zones. Barely enough time for a human to take 3 steps. But 3 steps in the right direction was all Marcus needed. He opened his eyes to darkness. 23 cycles of nothing but shadows and silence. 23 cycles of feeding his body just enough to maintain muscle function while conserving every calorie for what was coming. 23 cycles of learning every sound, every vibration, every breath of this prison. Marcus Cole stood. His muscles protested, atrophied from disuse, but primed by the meditation techniques Admiral Chen had taught him years ago. Techniques that no Kazari scanner could detect. Techniques humanity had developed across millennia of monks, soldiers, and survivors who pushed their bodies beyond all rational limits. He approached the feeding slot, 2 hours until the next delivery, 2 hours to prepare. Marcus reached up and touched the slot's edge, felt the magnetic seal, felt the gap where atmosphere pressure wasn't quite equalized. There, he began to work, not with the fractured tray, that was a decoy, something to keep them focused while the real escape mechanism took shape. No, Marcus worked with something far simpler. Himself. He dislocated his left shoulder first. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot explosion that shot through his nervous system like lightning. He didn't make a sound, didn't allow his heart rate to spike, simply breathed through it, compartmentalizing the agony the way he'd been trained. Then his right shoulder. Then his wrists. Each joint popped free with the wet sound of cartilage separating. Each separation added another inch of reach, another degree of flexibility. By the time he finished, Marcus Cole no longer looked quite human. His proportions were wrong, arms hanging at angles that defied anatomy. But he could now reach places he couldn't reach before. The feeding slot opened exactly on schedule. The tray slid through. Marcus moved. His extended arm shot into the gap before the magnetic seal engaged. 7 seconds, just as he'd calculated. His fingers found the emergency release mechanism on the other side. A failsafe designed for maintenance, never intended to be accessed from inside the cell. But no one had considered what a human might do to their own body for the chance of freedom. The seal disengaged. The slot stayed open. Marcus Cole, still utterly silent, began to pull himself through an opening designed for nothing larger than a food tray. His dislocated shoulders compressed, his chest compressed, his hips scraped against crystalline edges that drew blood in thin lines across his torso. And he did not make a sound. Part 6. The hunt begins. The alarm reached Warden Telvos during his 3rd consecutive hour of meditation-free monitoring. Security breach in Sector 7. Prisoner 771 is no longer in his cell. Telvos was on his feet before the message finished. How? The surveillance feeds showed nothing. Sir, we don't know. One moment he was sitting in meditation position, the next the infrared sensors detected no heat signature. We switched to motion detection, nothing. Atmospheric analysis, nothing. It's as if he simply vanished. Impossible. Run a full diagnostic. We already did, sir. The cell is empty and, sir, there's something else. What? The feeding slot. There's biological residue on the interior, blood and, we think, skin tissue. Analysis suggests he somehow compressed his skeletal structure and went through the slot. Telvos felt the cold spread through his thorax again, stronger now. The slot is 12 centimeters wide. Humans have a skeletal minimum of approximately 20 centimeters. Yes, sir. That's why we initially discounted the theory. But the evidence is conclusive. He dislocated multiple joints and forced himself through an opening that should have killed him. Should have. Sir, the blood trail leads into the maintenance shaft behind the slot, and it's moving. Telvos activated the facility-wide alert. Every guard, every system, every automated defense protocol came online simultaneously. The void's embrace locked down with a sound like thunder echoing through metal corridors. Seal every exit, deploy the hunters, I want him found. Sir, should we notify the Galactic Council? Protocol requires. No, Telvos' voice was sharp. This stays internal. If word gets out that a human, a single baseline human, escaped Sector 7 through a feeding slot, we become the laughingstock of 12 systems. Find him. Quietly. Yes, sir. Telvos pulled up the facility schematics. The maintenance shaft behind Sector 7 connected to the service corridors, which connected to the engineering level, which connected to the shuttle bay. If the human knew the ship's layout, and Telvos was increasingly certain he did, there were at least 17 paths to potential escape. But 17 paths also meant 17 opportunities for interception. Deploy squads to positions Alpha through Omega. Full weapons authorization. The human is to be recaptured alive if possible. If not, Telvos hesitated. If not, confirmed termination is acceptable. He stared at the schematics, at the maze of corridors where a bleeding, broken human was somehow evading detection. What are you? The question haunted him as the hunt began. Part 7. Through the maze. Marcus Cole moved through darkness like water through cracks in stone. His shoulders were back in their sockets now, painful but functional. The blood loss was concerning but manageable. He had approximately 4 hours before physical deterioration would compromise his effectiveness. 4 hours, plenty of time. The maintenance shafts of the Void's embrace were a labyrinth, designed to be navigable only by service drones and maintenance personnel with neural maps. Marcus had neither. What he had was 23 cycles of vibration analysis, 23 cycles of mapping the ship's rhythm through the floor of his cell. And humans, he knew, were pattern recognition machines. Every species in the galaxy had evolved some form of heightened sense. The Malurians with their echolocation, the Thren with their thermal vision, the Kazari with their electromagnetic perception. Humans had nothing so dramatic. Instead, they had generalization. The ability to take incomplete data and construct accurate models, to see a shadow and recognize a predator, to hear a rustle and calculate threat trajectory, to feel a vibration and understand the machine that produced it. The shafts vibrated with the hunt's urgency, guard squads rushing to positions, automated defenses coming online, the entire ship tightening like a fist around him. Marcus smiled in the darkness. They don't understand. 19 species had joined the hunt for Marcus Cole. Each brought their unique advantages: speed, strength, sensory acuity, tactical brilliance. Each represented millennia of evolution and technological enhancement. None of them had ever hunted humans. Humans who had spent their entire evolutionary history as both predator and prey, who had learned to read landscapes, anticipate movements, and exploit weaknesses before they could even speak, whose ancestors had tracked mammoth across frozen tundras and hidden from saber-toothed tigers in the dark. The galaxy thought humans were primitive because they had achieved space travel late. They didn't understand that the delay was a feature, not a bug. Humans had been too busy fighting each other to look outward, too busy refining the arts of war and survival to waste time on peaceful exploration. And now, for the first time, a human was loose in alien territory. Marcus reached a junction in the maintenance shaft. 3 paths, 2 leading toward guard positions he detected through vibration, 1 leading somewhere quieter. He took the 3rd path. His movements were precise despite the damage to his body. Years of training in dozens of environments had taught him to function through pain, exhaustion, and injury. Special operations didn't select for the strongest soldiers. They selected for the most stubborn ones. The ones who simply refused to stop. Ahead, Marcus detected a new vibration, different from the guard patrols, smaller, faster. Hunters. The Kazari deployed specialized tracking units for escaped prisoners, genetically modified predators with enhanced sensory suites and neural links to Central Command. They had never failed to recapture a target. Marcus heard them before he saw them, clicking joints, hissing breath, the sound of claws scraping against metal. He pressed himself into a junction and waited. The first hunter rounded the corner approximately 3 seconds later. It was beautiful in a terrible way, all teeth and speed and killing efficiency. Its eyes swept the corridor, infrared and ultraviolet and electromagnetic all layered together into perfect predatory perception. It looked directly at Marcus and saw nothing, because Marcus had stopped breathing, stopped his heart, entered a state of controlled near-death that the Kazari had no name for because no Kazari had ever achieved it. The hunter moved on. Marcus waited 60 seconds, then resumed his heartbeat. The effort cost him. His vision blurred momentarily and his extremities tingled with hypoxia. But he was past the checkpoint. 3 more to go. Part 8. The Revelation. Threnax felt the ship shudder around him. "What's happening?" he demanded. His network of informants, smugglers, thieves, and corrupted guards had gone silent simultaneously. The facility lockdown had severed communication lines that had operated for decades without interruption. But Threnax had built his network well. One channel remained. "It's the human," his contact whispered. "He's escaped. He's in the maintenance shafts. They've deployed everything, every guard, every hunter, every automated system, and they can't find him." "Impossible." "That's what the warden said 2 hours ago. They've lost 15 hunters since then. The human is killing them in the dark, one at a time, without weapons." Threnax felt his scales rise, an involuntary fear response he hadn't experienced since childhood. How? No one knows. The hunter's neural links show nothing. One moment they're tracking, the next they're dead. No struggle, no warning, just gone. This is one human, one, against an entire ship. "Sir, there's something else. Something the wardens are trying to keep quiet." "Tell me." "The human isn't heading for the shuttle bay. He isn't heading for any escape route. He's been circling, moving through the ship in a pattern our analysts can't decipher." "Then what is he doing?" The contact paused. We think he's mapping." "Mapping?" "Every security system, every defensive installation, every structural weakness. He's been in half the ship's corridors now, and everywhere he goes, security feeds experience minor glitches, just enough to create gaps." Threnax understood then. Not escape, not mere survival. Preparation. The human wasn't running. He was learning, gathering intelligence, turning the Kazari's own prison into a weapon. "Alert the other faction leaders," Threnax ordered. "All of them. Tell them what's happening. Tell them to be ready." "For what?" "I don't know, but when this human makes his move, I want us positioned to take advantage." Because Threnax, the Devourer, recognized what the Kazari were too arrogant to see. The hunt had already been reversed. They weren't chasing the human anymore. He was hunting them. Part 9. The Reckoning. Marcus Cole stood in the heart of the Void's embrace, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies. 27 hunters, 43 guards, 2 commanders who had made the mistake of trying to corner him personally. He had killed them all without speaking, without hesitation, without mercy. His body was a ruin, ribs cracked, left eye swollen shut, wounds reopening with every movement. But his mind remained clear, sharp, focused on the single objective that had driven him through 26 cycles of darkness and pain. The data core. The Void's embrace wasn't just a prison, it was a repository. The Kazari stored their most sensitive intelligence here, protected by the same security systems that kept 7,000 prisoners contained. Ship movements, fleet positions, the location of their homeworld's defensive installations. And somewhere in this facility's archives was the weapon that would change everything. Project Isolation. Admiral Chen had died protecting the knowledge of its existence. The rest of the human fleet had sacrificed themselves to ensure Marcus reached this prison. Everything, the capture, the torture, the escape, had been planned. Not by the Kazari. By humanity. Marcus moved through the central corridor, no longer bothering with stealth. Every guard who could oppose him was dead or hiding. The ship's automated defenses had been systematically disabled during his aimless, wandering through the maintenance shafts. The Kazari's perfect prison had become his weapon. The archive doors stood before him, 10 meters of reinforced crystal, designed to withstand orbital bombardment. Marcus reached into the satchel he'd assembled during his journey, components stripped from dead hunters, circuitry harvested from disabled security nodes, chemical compounds extracted from maintenance supplies. In his hands, they became something new. The Kazari had underestimated humanity once. They had looked at human technology and seen primitiveness. They had looked at human warfare and seen savagery. They had never understood the fundamental truth that made humans terrifying. Humans were engineers. Everything could be a weapon. Everything could be a tool. The same hands that painted masterpieces could build bombs. The same minds that wrote poetry could calculate trajectories. Marcus placed the improvised charge and stepped back. The archive doors vaporized in a flash of stolen light. Inside, holographic displays flickered to life. Centuries of Kazari intelligence, waiting to be claimed. Marcus moved to the central terminal and began downloading. Project Isolation wasn't just a weapon, it was a map. The locations of every slave camp in the galaxy. Every species the Kazari had conquered and broken, every world waiting for liberation, and humanity's path to reach them all. Stop! Marcus turned. Warden Telvo stood in the ruined doorway, flanked by the last of his elite guard. His weapon was raised, trembling slightly. It's over, Telvo said. Whatever you came for, you won't leave with it. My reinforcements arrive in 30 minutes. You cannot escape. Marcus looked at the warden, then at the guards, then at the download progress, 87% complete. He smiled and spoke his first words in 26 cycles. Who said anything about escape? The warden's eyes widened. I'm not here to leave, Marcus continued. I'm here to send a message. The data I'm downloading is already being transmitted to 17 relay stations across the sector. In approximately 4 minutes, every resistance cell in the galaxy will have the location of every Kazari military asset. Impossible, our communications are blocked. By systems I disabled 6 hours ago. Marcus tilted his head. Did you think I was running randomly? Every path I took, every hunter I killed, it was all necessary to open one very specific channel. The download reached 100%. Marcus felt the transmission pulse outward, carrying information that would reshape the galaxy. Worlds would rise, armies would form. The Kazari Empire, which had conquered 10,000 systems, would face something it had never faced before. Unified resistance. You're going to kill me now, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I always knew that was likely, but here's the thing, Warden, I'm not afraid. Why not? Marcus's smile widened. Because I'm not alone anymore, and you never understood what that means. Telvos hesitated. What are you talking about? Humanity, Marcus said. We don't fight for glory or conquest. We fight for each other. Every soldier in my fleet died knowing their sacrifice would matter, and I accepted this mission knowing I would probably never return home. He stepped forward, toward the weapons aimed at his chest. But my people will remember, and they'll come for your empire with everything they have. Not for revenge, we're better than that, but for every world you've enslaved, every species you've broken, every child who grew up in chains because you decided their freedom didn't matter. The guards looked at each other. Something was changing in their eyes, not fear, but something else. Something Marcus recognized from every army he'd ever faced. Doubt. You can kill me, Marcus said, but you can't kill what I represent. Humanity isn't just one species anymore. It's an idea, and ideas don't die in prison cells. Telvos' weapon lowered slightly. Why didn't you speak before? 26 cycles of silence. Why? Because speaking would have made me human to you, familiar, easy to understand. Marcus's eyes were steady, calm. I needed you to see me as something else, something that couldn't be broken, something that couldn't be stopped. A monster. A message. The facility shuddered. Alarms blared, different ones now, external warnings. Marcus felt the vibration change and knew. They came. 17 vessels. Human vessels. Breaking through the Kazari defensive perimeter with weapons that should have been impossible for. 17 vessels. Human vessels. Breaking through the Kazari defensive perimeter with weapons that should have been impossible for a species so young to possess. Ships that moved with coordinated precision, exploiting every gap in the defense grid that Marcus had mapped and transmitted. That's impossible, Telvos whispered. No fleet could have reached us this quickly. We're in the deepest sector of Kazari space. They've been waiting, Marcus said, for 26 cycles, just outside sensor range, patient, like we always are. The lead vessel's signature registered on the facility's failing sensors. HSS Persistence, a name that told the entire story of humanity in 2 words. Telvos's weapon clattered to the floor. His guards looked at each other, then at the approaching fleet, then at the human who stood bleeding before them, and they ran. Marcus didn't stop them. He turned back to the terminal, watching the data transmission complete its final packets. Across the galaxy, resistance cells were receiving coordinates. Slave worlds were learning their chains had weaknesses. Species that had surrendered hope were finding it again. You could have escaped at any time, Telvos said quietly. He hadn't run. Something kept him rooted, watching. The maintenance shafts, the shuttle bay, a dozen opportunities. Escape was never the mission. Then what was? Marcus looked at the warden, really looked at him for the first time. Not as an enemy, not as a target, just as another being trying to understand something beyond his experience. Hope, Marcus said. The Kazari conquered through despair. You showed every species that resistance was futile, that your technology was too advanced, that your empire was too vast. He gestured at the ruined archive. But hope is a weapon too, and it spreads faster than any fleet. The facility shuddered again. Closer now. The human ships were engaging the station's outer defenses, and those defenses were failing, compromised by the same sabotage Marcus had performed during his random wandering. Your people will die today, Telvos said, even if they rescue you. This station has self-destruct protocols. I can activate them right now. You won't. How can you be certain? Because you're still standing here. Marcus took a step closer. Because part of you wants to see what happens next. The Kazari haven't faced real opposition in 1,000 years. You've forgotten what it feels like to be challenged, to be uncertain, to be alive in the way that only conflict creates. Telvos's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of emotional distress in his species. You think you understand us. I think you've been bored for centuries. I think your empire grew too easily, conquered too quickly. And I think somewhere beneath all that certainty, you've been waiting for someone to finally push back. Explosions rocked the station. Primary power failed, plunging the archive into emergency lighting. Red shadows painted everything in blood tones. The question, Marcus continued, is what you do now. You can die here defending an empire that never truly needed you, or you can live and witness what comes next. What comes next is war. Yes, but not the kind you're imagining. Marcus turned toward the door. The Kazari think war is about territory, resources, power. Humans know better. War is about ideas. And the idea we're spreading today, that tyranny can be defeated, that's worth more than any fleet. Telvos watched the human walk away, limping, bleeding, broken in a dozen places but somehow still moving. Why spare me? He called out. Marcus paused at the threshold. Because someone needs to tell this story. Someone needs to explain to the Kazari High Command exactly what happened here. How one human, with nothing but patience and will, turned their most secure facility into a beacon of resistance. He looked back one final time. Tell them we're coming, all of us. Every world you enslaved, every species you broke, every child who grew up hearing stories of Kazari invincibility. His smile was terrible and bright. Tell them the galaxy just woke up. Marcus Cole walked into the chaos of battle, toward the human ships that had come for him. Behind him, Warden Telvos stood alone in the ruins of an archive that had once contained an empire's greatest secrets. Now it contained only ashes and questions. Part 10. The Awakening. 3 months later. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session for the first time in 600 cycles. Representatives from 47 species filled the great amphitheater, their murmurs creating a constant background hum of anxiety and anticipation. At the center of the chamber, a holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy. It was on fire. 17 Kazari systems had fallen in the first month alone. Not to human fleets, humanity's navy was still too small for direct confrontation, but to rebellions that erupted with coordinated precision. Slave populations rising simultaneously, security systems failing at critical moments, supply lines severed by saboteurs who seemed to know exactly where to strike. The intelligence leak from the Void's embrace has compromised our entire defensive infrastructure, the Kazari ambassador admitted. Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. Every patrol route, every garrison position, every vulnerability we thought was secret, they know it all. And you expect us to intervene, the Malurian delegate laughed. Your empire spent millennia convincing us resistance was impossible. Now a single human has proven otherwise. Why would we help you maintain power? Because if the Kazari fall, chaos follows. The galactic economy depends on our shipping lanes, our trade networks, Your slaves, the Thren representative interrupted. Your forced labor, your economic stability built on the backs of species you conquered. The chamber erupted in accusations and counter-accusations. Species that had remained neutral for centuries suddenly found their voices. Old grievances surfaced. Alliance lines shifted. And watching it all, from a small observation gallery reserved for minor species, a human delegation sat in silence. Admiral James Chen, no relation to the fallen Admiral Chen, but carrying her legacy, observed the chaos with satisfaction. Marcus's plan worked even better than projected, his aide whispered. The council is fragmenting. The Kazari are losing allies by the hour. The plan was never to defeat them militarily, Chen replied. It was to change the story. For 1,000 years, the narrative has been that the Kazari are unbeatable. Marcus proved that narrative was a lie. Now everyone is recalculating. And what happens next? Chen smiled, a quiet expression that held echoes of Marcus Cole's own terrible brightness. Next, we negotiate, not from weakness but from possibility. Every species in this chamber is realizing that the future is no longer fixed, that the Kazari's grip can be broken. They'll come for us. The Kazari won't forgive what we've done. Let them come. Chen stood, preparing to address the council when the opportunity arose. They still don't understand what they're facing. They think Marcus Cole was exceptional, unique, a statistical anomaly. He looked out at the churning mass of alien delegates, at the crumbling order of a galaxy that had been static for too long. They don't realize that every human is capable of what Marcus did, given enough time, enough pressure, enough reason. Chen's voice dropped. We're not exceptional, we're just the first, and now, thanks to Marcus, the galaxy knows it. Epilogue. The message. Marcus Cole never returned to active duty. His body had been pushed too far, damaged too deeply. The doctors, both human and alien, marveled that he was still alive, let alone conscious. He walked with a permanent limp now. His left arm never fully recovered from the dislocations. His eyes carried shadows that never quite faded. But he was alive, and he was free. 6 months after the Void's embrace, Marcus stood on a beach on New Eden, one of the first worlds liberated by the spreading rebellion. The sand was purple, the water ran silver, and the sky held 3 moons in perpetual dance. Beside him stood Telvos, former warden, former enemy, now something else entirely. "I delivered your message," Telvos said, "to the High Command exactly as you asked. And they dismissed it, called it propaganda, insisted you were an aberration, a freak occurrence that could never be replicated." Telvos's voice held bitter amusement. "They learned otherwise when the Helix liberation began, and the Gamma Sector uprising, and the Outer Rim rebellion." Marcus watched the alien waves lap at the purple shore. "What will you do now?" "I don't know. I've spent 2 centuries maintaining a prison. I don't know how to do anything else." "You could learn." Telvos turned to face the human. "You still don't hate me after everything, the torture, the isolation, the things I did to you." "Hatred requires energy. I'd rather spend mine building." "Building what?" Marcus pointed at the sky, where ships were visible in the atmosphere, human and alien vessels working together, carrying supplies to newly liberated worlds. "That, a galaxy where species work together instead of conquering each other, where different means interesting instead of threatening, where someone like you and someone like me can stand on a beach and have a conversation." "Naive." "Maybe, but naive is just another word for hopeful, and hope is a weapon. Yes, you mentioned that." Telvos was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm beginning to understand what you mean." They stood in silence, watching the silver waves. 2 beings from worlds that had been enemies for as long as either existed. 2 survivors of a war that was still unfolding across 1,000 star systems. "What was it like?" Telvos finally asked. "Those 26 cycles in darkness, the complete isolation, how did you endure it?" Marcus considered the question. It was one he'd been asked 100 times since his rescue. By doctors, by military debriefers, by journalists and politicians and beings who couldn't fathom what he'd experienced. He'd never answered, not really. But here on this purple beach, with an enemy who had become something like a friend, he found the words. "I wasn't alone," Marcus said. "I knew my people were out there, waiting, preparing. Every moment of darkness was a moment closer to liberation. Every heartbeat of silence was communication, proof that I was still alive, still fighting, still human." He turned to face Telvos directly. "That's what your empire never understood. You isolated me to break my spirit, but humans don't exist in isolation. We carry our people with us, our history, our stories, our stubborn, ridiculous, unbreakable hope." And that was enough. It was everything. The 3 moons rose higher, casting overlapping shadows across the silver sea. In the distance, a child laughed, the first generation to grow up free on a world that had known only chains. Marcus Cole closed his eyes and listened. After 26 cycles of silence, it was the most beautiful sound in the universe.